Hey Melissa, Erica, Marisol, Sabrina, Masu, Linda, and Mian. I am going to be reviewing the assignment that you put together. This is so you can understand what works and what needs to be improved and apply this for your own individual conventions report that will be your final assignment. I will also do some track changes within the document and send that your way as well. Be sure to review both carefully and perhaps multiple times because this will help you help to ensure that you'll receive a really good grade on your final assignment. So with that, let's start. The first thing that I want to mention is this report needs to be in APA formatting, which would mean you would want the title of the paper to be here in caps. So it would be Literacy Campaign Reports, and on the far right, you would want the page number. You would need none of this information. The only information you would need here is the first name and last name of yourself. You would want the title, you can have the title be, oh no, you can have the title here, but just note it does not have to be bold and it should not be underlined. So that covers the APA formatting part of this. I don't want it underlined. There you go. Okay, so let's now start with the introduction. The literacy campaigns organized in Russia, Cuba, and Ghana were all executed by a discourse community of teachers. A teacher is defined as a person who aids in acquiring knowledge. The teachers in these campaigns were citizens and educators who ultimately accomplished literacy within their respective countries. The goal for these campaigns was to establish literacy amongst the illiterate population. By utilizing a plan of action along with setting up an achievable goal, this became the method of communication practiced by the discourse community of teachers. The effects of these literacy campaigns were prominent and affected the futures of their citizens as the society became more educated and gave them more mobility. This is why the discourse community of teachers in these communities was very significant in the way that they shaped their society. All right, so what's interesting about this introduction is it seems like you're talking about literacy campaigns, not literacy campaign reports. So, I mean, I'm fine with that, but just so you know, my original intention was for you to do an analysis of the literacy campaign report. That would be the assignment that you all did during the first half of the semester. I was interested in you looking at sample campaign reports, which I believe I linked you to, and looking at what are the conventions of that kind of report. So if you were to have read some of them, you might have said like, oh, I noticed that a lot of these reports summarize their campaign in the introduction. A lot of these reports use outside resources. A lot of these reports talk a lot about this specific kind of campaigning. So that's what I was interested in, but I imagine if you're interested here in literacy campaigns, you're going to talk to me about the conventions or the characteristics of a literacy campaign, which is also fine. In fact, I think your idea is probably more interesting, but just do note the difference. The other thing I want you to be careful of is they, them, this, and I think you say these are very vague words that can easily confuse a reader. So when you say it was very significant in the way that they shaped their society, I have no idea who they is and who there is. So just be mindful of that. The other thing is, in an introduction for a report like this, you really want to list the conventions that you'll be talking about. So if you're going to be talking about, the use of persuasive language, if you're going to be talking about the need to have clear objectives, all of that should be mentioned in your introduction so your reader knows what you're planning on teaching them about this genre of writing. Also, just this is like a stylistic thing. I don't know if I'm comfortable with executed as The verb of choice here, when I think of executed, I think of death, but that just might be me. But it's still, I wanted to bring that to your attention. All right. A discourse community is defined by a community which shares a common lexicon and adheres to such rules and structure within the community. The genre or types of writing that has similar characteristics of such rules become the lesson plan so that the educators throughout Russia, Cuba, and Ghana could fulfill their goals of expanding literacy. Through these lesson plans, a strategy was devised to take learners step by step through the process of literacy. For example, the lesson plan in Cuba arranged the literacy instruction to commence with consonants and vowels. The next task in the lesson plan was to provide instruction on the reading and writing of first and last names. With the aid of these tasks, help bring unison and the achievement of literacy among the Cubans. Okay, so I think you're interested in the convention of lesson plans. However, I'm confused about why you define genre and discourse community here. I think that sounds like an introduction, so I'm not sure why it's here. I think it's a good idea to be as direct as possible, so it might have been clearer if you said one convention of a literacy campaign is to have clear lesson plans, and then explain sort of why. Give your Cuba example. That might have been clearer. Okay. Lesson plans are important for both educators to educator and student to student. I don't understand that sentence. Okay. Lesson plans were one way the individuals amongst the campaign were able to check and make sure their lessons were all corresponding to one another and that individuals all across the country were getting the same type of information taught to them. The lesson plans need to be exclusive to an objective and in a goal. As a result, it sets clear expectations for what the teacher needs to teach and what the student needs to learn. Lesson plans are the basis of communication for all individuals in the discourse community. The writing style in said lesson plans needs to be unbiased and transparent. Okay, so this needs to be proofread, but I think this is actually doing a great job of explaining what lesson plans are, and so for that reason might need to be a part of that first body paragraph because it's giving more concrete information about the lesson plan. All right. Just as genres are a part of discourse communities, conventions are a part of genres. All right, that's unnecessary just in general for your final assignment. You can assume that I know what genres, discourse communities, and conventions are. So it's more important that you talk specifically about the genre you're interested in, the community you're interested in, and the conventions you're interested in. So again, I don't need this definition of conventions. You could start here. A convention within the genre of lesson plans is succinct writing to convey every task within the given curriculum distinctly. Teachers must build their lesson plans accordingly to the needs of their students. Clarity is extremely important in this case. The conventions relevant today as a part of a lesson plan might include using PowerPoint presentations during a lecture or distributing flashcards to help students review imperative material. The utilization of such conventions aid in the achievement of the concise goals that are part of a discourse community of teachers. Okay, so I get now what you're doing. You're not really doing literacy campaigns. Your genre of writing is the lesson plan, and you're interested in breaking down how the lesson plan works. That's fine, but that is not a literacy campaign. And so for your own assignments, please make sure you're clear on what genre of writing you'll be analyzing. Because in this intro, it seems like you're going to analyze the genre of literacy campaigns, when in fact you're interested in the genre of the lesson plan. The other thing I want you to be mindful of is you really want to have a well-organized paper. And so what that means is you should consider outlining before you start writing. And so if you had outlined here, you might have asked yourself, okay, so what are the main characteristics of a lesson plan? And you might have, yes, it has to be succinct. The other thing that you mention here is it must use technology. The other thing that you mentioned here is must have a clear objective. Once you identify these characteristics or these conventions, same thing, you would then say to yourself or ask yourself, why do lesson plans need to be succinct? Then you might ask yourself, what are some examples of lesson plans that are succinct? You would want to give examples. And then you might explain the examples to show how they're succinct. Same thing. Why should they use technology? Examples of this. And then explain the examples. Same thing here. Why have a clear objective, examples of a clear objective, and explain the examples. The other thing you can do is you can explain how having a succinct lesson plan helps teachers reach their overall goal. That's also another thing that you can do in your own report. So if you feel like you don't have enough to say with these 3 points, ask yourself, well, how does this convention help my discourse community reach its goals? So if I'm dealing with a discourse community like teachers, their goals are to make sure that students are learning, right? So how does being succinct help students learn? How does using technology help students learn? How does having a clear objective help students learn? And then the conclusion here is fine, but I would just advise that you spend more time in developing the conventions and maybe have a 2 to 3 sentence conclusion that's just sort of summarizes the conventions that you've just explained to your reader. And just as a heads up, I don't really spend a lot of time sort of grading the conclusion. I'm more interested in the body of the paper because that's where all of the work is happening. But should you want to develop a really great conclusion, the rule of thumb is one sentence that summarizes the conventions, another sentence that might explain like a new thing that the reader or the writer has learned. So, for example, I might here say, it is now clear that in order to have an effective lesson plan, one must have a clear objective, succinct writing, and the use of technology, right? So that's me summarizing the conventions. In fact, though lesson plans are written, technology is a fundamental part of a student's learning, right? So that's me saying, here's a new thing that I feel like I've taught you. Here's a new thing that I feel like I've learned through the process of writing this. And then the third sentence could be sort of next steps that the reader might want to take. So I might say, once you've mastered lesson plans, another way to ensure student success would be to master observation reports or parent-teacher conference notes or whatever you think the reader should do next after having read your report. You might also say, like, after mastering succinct writing, technology, and clear objectives, you also want to consider the importance of having lesson plans that meet the standards of whatever city that you live in or you're teaching in. So again, that would be the next steps that the reader would take. And that's like a formula you can use for any kind of writing when you're developing a conclusion to make sure that you're not just repeating everything your introduction said. All right, so with that, I will send this all your way, and I look forward to reading your final assignment.